When Kevin looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're too old to be part of our future. Customers don't want to see a relic behind the counter." While my own daughter Laura nodded in silent agreement, something inside me went completely still. I said nothing, just walked to my truck. But in that moment I made my first move. I drove straight to First National and closed the business account where I still held $12,000 in reserve funds. By the time they realized what I'd done, I was already 3 steps ahead of them. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. But let me take you back to that morning when everything still seemed perfect. I had arrived at Sunrise Cafe, the little coffee shop I'd helped Laura and Kevin build from nothing, carrying a bag of fresh Colombian beans I'd special ordered from a supplier in Cincinnati. The autumn sun was streaming through the windows I'd personally installed, casting warm light across the mismatched vintage tables Laura had found at estate sales. "Dad, you're early again," Laura laughed, tying her apron as she emerged from the back room. At 32, she still had that same crooked smile that had melted my heart when she was 5 years old, gap-toothed and asking me to fix her broken doll. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted, setting the coffee beans on the counter. "Figured I'd get the inventory sorted before the Sunday rush." Kevin emerged from the office, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. "Howard, you know you don't have to keep doing this weekend work. We can handle things." "I know," I said, already heading to check the espresso machine I'd spent 2 days repairing the month before. "But this old machinist needs something to keep his hands busy. Besides, Maria always said idle hands were the devil's workshop." Laura's face softened at the mention of her mother. She would have loved seeing this place so busy. The 3 of us worked in comfortable rhythm, preparing for what we knew would be a bustling Sunday morning. Regular customers had started lining up outside even before we officially opened. Mrs. Patterson from down the street waved through the window, holding up her usual order written on a piece of paper. The Johnson family had made this their weekly tradition after church. "You know," I said, wiping down the counter, "I was thinking about that expansion we discussed. The space next door is still available, and I've got some ideas about how we could break through that wall without compromising the structural integrity." Laura and Kevin exchanged a quick glance, so brief I almost missed it. That's really generous of you to think about, Dad," Laura said, but something in her voice had shifted slightly. "Well, family takes care of family," I replied, not noticing the way Kevin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. We opened the doors at 7 sharp, and the familiar chaos of the morning rush began. I took my usual position by the register, handling inventory and making sure the equipment ran smoothly while Laura and Kevin worked the coffee station. Everything felt exactly as it should. 3 generations of Whitmans working together to build something lasting. It was around 10:30, during a brief lull between the morning rush and the lunch crowd, when Kevin cleared his throat and suggested we sit down for a few minutes. "There's something we need to discuss," he said, his tone suddenly formal. Laura avoided my eyes as she untied her apron. "Maybe we should go to the office." The small back office I'd helped them set up felt cramped with all 3 of us inside. Kevin sat behind the desk I'd built myself from reclaimed oak, while Laura perched nervously on the edge of a chair. I remained standing. "Howard," Kevin began, and the use of my first name instead of Dad sent the first chill down my spine. "Laura and I have been talking about the future of the business." "That's good," I said slowly. "Planning ahead is smart." Kevin leaned back in his chair, and for the first time, I noticed something cold in his expression. "We've been working with a business consultant, and we've developed what's called a succession plan. For when we eventually want to expand or make changes." Laura finally looked up, but her eyes were filled with something I'd never seen before when she looked at me. Embarrassment, maybe, or worse, shame. "The thing is," Kevin continued, his voice gaining confidence, "this business needs to appeal to a younger demographic, millennials, Gen Z customers. They want to see people they can relate to behind the counter." I felt something cold settling in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. 37 years as a machinist had taught me to stay calm when machines started making wrong sounds. Kevin leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "You're too old to be part of our future, Howard. Customers don't want to see a relic behind the counter." The words hit me like a physical blow, but it was Laura's response that nearly dropped me to my knees. Instead of defending me, instead of showing any sign of disagreement, she nodded slowly. "We appreciate everything you've done," she said quietly, still not meeting my eyes. "But Kevin's right. We need to think about what's best for the business." I stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. The sound of the espresso machine hissing in the main cafe seemed to come from another world. I could hear Mrs. Patterson asking one of our part-time employees about our Colombian blend, the same blend I'd spent hours researching and sourcing. "I see," I said finally. I turned and walked out of that office, through the cafe where customers were enjoying their Sunday morning coffee, past the equipment I'd maintained and the inventory I'd organized, out the front door and into the October air that suddenly felt sharp enough to cut. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't argue. I didn't even slam the door. I just left. As I sat in my truck in the parking lot, staring at the cafe through the windshield, the memories came flooding back with painful clarity. I looked at that cheerful yellow building and remembered the day Laura had called me, crying, saying she and Kevin had found the perfect location but were $20,000 short for the down payment. I had gone to First National that same afternoon and withdrawn the money from my retirement account. Money Maria and I had saved for 38 years, planning for a comfortable retirement that she would never get to enjoy. This was the same daughter for whom I had sold my 1967 Mustang, Maria's favorite car, the one she'd called our baby before we had our real baby, to pay for her college tuition when financial aid fell through. I'd gotten $15,000 for that car, though it was worth twice that to me in memories. Every month for the past 2 years, I had written a check for $800 to help them cover the initial operating costs. That was $19,200 of my Social Security and pension payments. Money I could have used for the home repairs I'd been putting off, or the vacation Maria and I had always planned to take to Ireland. But it wasn't just the money that haunted me as I sat there. It was the time. Every weekend for 8 months, I had driven 23 miles from my house to this cafe. I had arrived early and stayed late, fixing their temperamental espresso machine, organizing their chaotic inventory system, even painting the bathroom because they couldn't afford to hire a painter. I had watched Laura learn to make lattes, celebrated with them when they got their first positive Yelp review, and listened to Kevin's grand plans for expansion. I had believed I was helping to build something that would last, something that would honor Maria's memory and provide security for our daughter. I remembered the night Maria died, when Laura had held my hand in the hospital waiting room and promised, "We'll take care of each other, Daddy. That's what families do." But sitting in that parking lot, watching strangers enjoy coffee in the space I had helped create, I realized I had been fooling myself. I wasn't family to Kevin, I was an investor, and apparently not a very welcome one. The hardest part wasn't even Kevin's words, cruel as they were. It was the way Laura had nodded. My own daughter, the little girl who used to sit on my lap while I read her stories, who had called me her hero in her high school graduation speech, had looked at me and agreed that I was too old, too much of a relic to be part of their future. I didn't cry. I calculated. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table under the light of the brass lamp Maria had bought at an antique shop in Columbus, surrounded by every document related to the cafe. Bank statements, receipts, contracts, loan papers, everything I had kept meticulously organized in a filing system that would have made any accountant proud. As I spread the papers across the table, a pattern began to emerge. The initial loan for the cafe equipment was in my name, secured by my house. The business license application listed me as a co-owner with a 40% stake. The lease agreement had my signature as a guarantor, meaning I was legally responsible if they defaulted on payments. But here's what Kevin and Laura didn't know. I had never transferred my share of the business to them. In their excitement to get started, they had never insisted on the formal paperwork that would have made their succession plan legal. On paper, I still owned nearly half of everything. I reached for my phone and dialed Jim Hendricks, an attorney who had handled Maria's estate and had been my neighbor for 15 years. "Jim, it's Howard. I need to understand my legal position in a business matter. Are you available this week?" "Of course, Howard. Everything all right? I'll explain when I see you." Tuesday morning, I sat across from Jim in his downtown Toledo office, the same office where Maria and I had signed our wills 12 years ago. "Let me get this straight," Jim said, adjusting his reading glasses as he reviewed the documents I'd brought. "You've invested $38,000 in cash? Your name is on the lease as guarantor? The equipment loan is secured by your house? And you're listed as owning 40% of the business?" "That's correct." "And they've developed a succession plan that excludes you without your consent?" "They have." Jim leaned back in his chair. "Howard, legally speaking, they can't exclude you from anything. You're not an employee, you're a business partner. Any major changes to the business structure would require your signature." "What are my options?" Jim was quiet for a moment, studying the papers. "Well, you could demand a buyout of your share at fair market value. You could force a dissolution of the partnership. Or," he paused, looking at me over his glasses, "you could exercise your rights as a partner and take control." "Explain that." "The lease is overdue by 6 days. I can see from these bank statements that they've been struggling to make payments. As the guarantor, you have the right to step in and take over the lease directly. Combined with your ownership stake and the fact that the equipment loan is secured by your house, you could legally assume full control of the operation." I felt something click into place, like the final gear in a complex machine finding its proper position. "How long would that take? If you move fast, we could have the papers filed by Friday." Wednesday afternoon, I visited Tom Morrison, the accountant who had been handling my taxes since I retired. Tom was one of those precise, methodical men that other precise, methodical men respect. "Howard," Tom said after reviewing the cafe's financial records, "this business is actually profitable, but just barely. They're making about $2,800 a month after expenses. But they're consistently late on rent payments and they've been drawing excessive salaries." "What do you mean, excessive?" Tom pointed to a line item on the profit and loss statement. "They're each taking $3,200 a month in salary. For a business this size, bringing in about $18,000 monthly, that's unsustainable. They should be taking maybe $2,000 each and reinvesting the rest." "How long can they continue at this rate? Based on their cash flow? Maybe 6 more months before they default on something major." Tom leaned forward, his expression serious. "Howard, if you were to take over this operation and run it properly, cut the salaries to reasonable levels, you could probably clear $4,000 to $5,000 a month profit. That's a decent return on your investment." I stared at the numbers, seeing not just financial data but the evidence of Kevin and Laura's mismanagement and, worse, their disregard for the business I had helped build. "Tom, if I were to buy them out, what would be a fair offer? Given their debt load and the fact that you're already the primary investor, I'd say $15,000 for their combined shares would be generous. Maybe too generous." That evening, I finalized my plan. It was elegant in its simplicity, like the best mechanical solutions I had devised in my 37 years as a machinist. Step 1 had already been completed on Sunday. I had withdrawn the $12,000 reserve fund, money they were counting on for next month's expenses. Step 2 would be executed on Thursday. Jim would file papers with the county clerk establishing my right to assume the lease directly, bypassing Kevin and Laura entirely. Step 3 would happen on Friday. I would arrive at the cafe during the morning rush, present them with legal documents, and offer them a choice: accept a buyout or watch me foreclose on the equipment loan. Thursday evening, Kevin called me for the first time since Sunday. "Howard, we need to talk." His voice was strained. "There's been some kind of mistake with the bank account." "No mistake," I said calmly. "Look, I think there might have been some miscommunication on Sunday. Laura's been really upset. And, Kevin, let me save us both some time. I'll be at the cafe tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock with my attorney. We'll discuss the future of the business then." "Your attorney?" "Howard, what's going on?" "Tomorrow, Kevin. 9 o'clock. Friday morning, I arrived at Sunrise Cafe at exactly 9 o'clock, accompanied by Jim Hendricks and carrying a manila folder containing documents that would change everything. Laura was behind the counter, her face pale and her movements nervous. Kevin emerged from the office the moment he saw me, his usual confidence replaced by barely concealed panic. We need to close for a private meeting, I announced to the handful of customers scattered throughout the cafe. Dad, you can't just... Laura began. Yes, I can, I said quietly but firmly. Jim, would you explain to my daughter and her husband their legal position? Jim opened his briefcase and removed a set of papers. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, as of yesterday afternoon, Mr. Whitman has assumed direct control of this lease agreement. Furthermore, as a 40% owner of this business, he is exercising his right to call for a restructuring of the partnership. Kevin's face went white. That's impossible. We have our own succession plan, which was never filed with the state and never signed by Mr. Whitman, Jim interrupted. You cannot exclude a business partner from succession planning without their consent. You cannot unilaterally change ownership structures. And you certainly cannot do either when that partner is also the primary creditor. I set the manila folder on the counter and opened it. Laura, Kevin, you have two choices. Choice 1. I buy out your combined 60% stake for $15,000, which Tom Morrison has determined is a fair price given your debt load and mismanagement. 15,000? Kevin sputtered. This business is worth at least. This business is worth exactly what someone is willing to pay for it, I said. And right now I'm the only buyer. Choice 2. I foreclose on the equipment loan that's secured by my house, shut down the operation, and you're left with nothing but debt. Laura finally found her voice. Dad, please, we can work this out. We didn't mean. Yes, you did mean it, I said, my voice steady but cold. You meant every word. You think I'm too old, too much of a relic. Well, this old relic just became your boss. Kevin stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous. You can't just steal our business. I'm not stealing anything. I'm collecting on an investment. Jim, show them the ownership documents. Jim laid out the papers methodically. The original partnership agreement signed by all three parties. The lease agreement with Mr. Whitman as guarantor. The equipment loan secured by Mr. Whitman's house. Bank records showing Mr. Whitman's total investment of $38,000. And here, he placed the final document on top, is the legal notice filed yesterday transferring the lease to Mr. Whitman directly. I looked at Laura, seeing tears in her eyes for the first time since Sunday. But I felt no satisfaction, only a cold sense of justice being served. You have until Monday morning to decide, I said. Take the buyout or I shut down the operation and you can explain to your creditors how you lost a profitable business. What about us? Laura whispered. What about our employees? I'll be keeping the 2 part-time baristas. They've been loyal and professional. As for you, I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. You made it clear that there's no place for old relics in your future. I'm simply returning the favor. Kevin tried one last desperate play. The customers won't accept this. They know us, they trust us. Kevin, the customers come here for good coffee and friendly service. They don't care who signs the paychecks, as long as their lattes are made properly and the shop stays open. Which, under my management, it will. I closed the folder and stood up. Jim will handle the paperwork. You have until Monday. Laura followed me to the door. Dad, please. I know what we said was wrong, but... I turned to look at my daughter one last time as her business partner, seeing not the little girl who used to help me in my garage workshop, but the woman who had stood by while her husband called me a relic. Laura, for 32 years, I thought I was raising a daughter who understood loyalty and respect. Last Sunday, I discovered I was wrong. I walked out of the cafe for the second time that week, but this time I carried the keys. Monday morning came and went without word from Laura or Kevin. At 9:15 a.m., Jim called to confirm that the buyout deadline had passed without response. They're legally out, Howard. The business is yours. I drove to the cafe, unlocked the door, and walked into my new life. The first thing I did was change the name. I removed the Sunrise Cafe sign that Kevin had been so proud of and replaced it with one that read Maria's Brew, a tribute to the woman whose retirement money had made this all possible. The second thing I did was call Janet Miller and Beth Rodriguez, the two part-time baristas who had always been professional and kind to customers. Both agreed to work full-time under new management. "Mr. Whitman," Janet said during our first staff meeting, "I have to tell you, some of us were pretty uncomfortable with how Kevin and Laura talked about you behind your back. We're glad you're in charge now." The third thing I did was implement the inventory management system I had been trying to get Laura and Kevin to adopt for months. Within 2 weeks, our food waste dropped by 30% and our profit margins improved accordingly. But the most important change was intangible. The cafe had a different energy now. Customers noticed that their coffee was consistently better, that their orders were accurate, and that the atmosphere was more welcoming. Word spread through Toledo's coffee community that Maria's Brew was under new management and worth visiting. Mrs. Patterson, who had been a regular since the beginning, summed it up perfectly one Thursday morning. "Howard, I have to say, this place feels like home again. You can tell it's run by someone who actually cares." By the end of the first month, our daily revenue had increased by 22%. By the end of the second month, I was clearing $4,800 in monthly profit, exactly what Tom Morrison had predicted. The confrontation I had been dreading came on a rainy Tuesday in December. Laura walked through the front door of Maria's Brew, her coat soaked and her face drawn. I was behind the counter training Beth on our new espresso machine when I saw her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Dad," she said finally. "Laura." She looked around the cafe, taking in the changes. The new artwork on the walls, photographs of Toledo's industrial history that I had found at the local museum's gift shop. The improved lighting system that I had installed myself. The steady stream of customers who clearly felt at home in the space. "It looks good," she admitted. "Thank you." She approached the counter slowly, as if unsure of her welcome. "Kevin and I were getting divorced." I wasn't surprised. Stress and financial pressure had a way of revealing the weak points in any structure, whether mechanical or matrimonial. "I'm sorry to hear that. He's working at a Starbucks now. Assistant manager." She gave a bitter laugh. "Turns out they don't mind older employees as much as he thought they would." I waited for her to continue. "I'm working at a call center downtown, customer service for an insurance company. She shrugged. "It's a job." I poured her a cup of coffee, the Colombian blend I had been sourcing since the beginning, and set it in front of her without charge. "Dad, I need you to know that I've regretted what happened every single day since October. What Kevin said, what I didn't say. It was wrong. It was cruel. And it wasn't true." I looked at my daughter, seeing both the woman who had disappointed me and the child I had raised to be better than that. "Laura, I spent 37 years in manufacturing. I learned early that when a machine breaks down, you have two choices. You can fix it, or you can replace it. But first, you have to understand why it failed." She waited. What failed in October wasn't just respect or gratitude. It was judgment. You and Kevin looked at a profitable partnership and decided it wasn't enough. You looked at a man who had invested his life savings in your dream and decided he was an embarrassment. That kind of poor judgment. It's not something you can fix with an apology. Laura's eyes filled with tears. "So that's it? We're done." I was quiet for a long moment, listening to the familiar sounds of the espresso machine, the quiet conversations of customers, the life of the cafe that had become my unexpected second career. "Laura, you're my daughter. That will never change. But trust is something you earn back over time, not something you restore with words." She nodded, wiping her eyes with a napkin. "If you want to rebuild what we had, you'll need to show me, not tell me, that you understand what went wrong and why it can never happen again." Laura stood up, leaving the untouched coffee on the counter. "I understand." She walked toward the door, then turned back. "Dad? The name. Maria's Brew. Mom would have loved it." "I know," I said. "That's why I chose it." 6 months later, on a bright Saturday morning in April, I was working behind the counter when I noticed a familiar face among the customers. Kevin Morrison sat at a corner table, wearing a green Starbucks apron and looking considerably older than his 35 years. He had ordered a simple black coffee and was reading what appeared to be job listings on his phone. When he looked up and saw me watching him, he seemed to consider leaving, but then thought better of it. He approached the counter slowly. "Howard, Kevin, I heard about Laura, that she's been coming by sometimes." "She has." Kevin shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I know there's nothing I can say that will make up for what I did, what I said, but I want you to know that I was wrong. About everything." I studied his face, seeing none of the arrogance that had characterized his behavior as my business partner. Financial hardship and personal failure had a way of teaching humility to those capable of learning it. "Kevin, do you know why this business is successful now when it was struggling under your management?" He shook his head. "It's not because I'm a better businessman. It's because I understand something you didn't. Respect isn't something you earn from customers. It's something you show to everyone. Employees, partners, suppliers, even old men who fix your equipment for free." Kevin nodded, his face flushed with embarrassment. "The customers don't come here because they want to see young, hip baristas. They come here because they want to feel valued and welcomed. When you treat people like relics, they can sense it, and they take their business elsewhere." I poured him a fresh cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. "This one's on the house." "Thank you." Kevin took the coffee and returned to his table, but he didn't stay long. As he was leaving, he stopped at the counter one more time. "Howard, for what it's worth, I think Laura has learned from all this. She talks about you differently now, with respect." "I hope so. And Howard, you were never a relic. You were the foundation of everything we built, and I was too stupid and too proud to see it." After he left, I returned to my work, but my mind wandered to thoughts of Maria and what she would have made of this whole situation. She had always been better than I was at forgiveness, quicker to see the potential for redemption in people who had disappointed her. But Maria had also been fiercely protective of those she loved. She would have been furious at Kevin's treatment of me, and she would have been heartbroken by Laura's betrayal. More than that, though, she would have been proud of how I had stood up for myself. At the end of that day, as I was closing up the cafe, I realized something had fundamentally changed in my life. For 8 months after Maria's death, I had felt lost, searching for purpose and meaning in retirement. I had poured my time and money into Laura's business partly out of love, but partly out of a desperate need to feel useful. Now, at 67 years old, I had found something I hadn't expected. A new career that brought me genuine satisfaction. Every morning, I woke up knowing that dozens of people would depend on me for their coffee, their morning routine, their small daily pleasure. I had employees who respected me, customers who appreciated me, and a business that was thriving under my care. The revenge I had taken on Kevin and Laura had been thorough and just. But the real victory was not in their downfall. It was in my own unexpected renaissance. Maria's Brew became more than just a coffee shop. It became a gathering place for Toledo's retirees, a spot where men and women of my generation could find community and respect. It became a training ground for young employees who learned that experience and wisdom had value. And it became my legacy, not the one I had planned, but the one I deserved. 1 year after taking control of the business, I hired Laura as a part-time employee. Not as a manager, not as a partner, but as a barista working to rebuild her relationship with her father and her understanding of what it means to be part of a family business. She started at minimum wage just like any other new employee. She worked weekends, learning to make lattes properly and treat customers with genuine warmth. She cleaned tables, took inventory, and slowly, very slowly, began to earn back my trust. Kevin, meanwhile, had moved to Columbus and found work managing a small restaurant. I heard through mutual friends that he had learned humility the hard way, but that he was working hard to rebuild his life. I hoped he had learned something from our experience that would serve him better in the future. But my story isn't really about revenge, though that's how it started. It's about the discovery that a man's value isn't determined by his age or his appearance, but by his character, his skills, and his commitment to treating others with dignity. Every morning when I unlock the doors of Maria's Brew, I think about the journey that brought me here. I think about the $38,000 investment that Kevin and Laura saw as a limitation but that I transformed into liberation. I think about the words too old and relic that were meant to diminish me but instead motivated me to prove my worth. And I think about Maria, whose memory inspired the name of this place and whose love gave me the strength to stand up for myself when it mattered most. The customers don't see an old relic when they look at me now. They see Howard Whitman, owner and operator of the best coffee shop in Toledo, a man who knows the value of hard work, loyalty, and treating people right. That's not revenge. That's justice. And it's the sweetest victory of all. If you liked this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family members who underestimated you? Let us know your story.